bird and fish can love each other, but where would they live? Apparently, this is an old country saying. I've since learned that I've come from country, about 7 generations worth of Indiana fields and Kentucky hillsides. When my grandfather was around 10 years old, he went to visit some family in Utility, Kentucky. And when he arrived, he found his cousin limping, and his cousin's own father had shot him in the knee in a family dispute over a country prostitute. When I was 10, I spotted some boys shooting some squirrels across the street. And I'd never witnessed the death of a creature before, and their furry bodies sort of twisted as they fell from what they must have assumed was a safe haven in the trees. And I clung to my mom, and I wept, and I had nightmares for weeks. You see, my family was very far removed from guns and feuds in the holler, but I'd seen photographs of these people standing alongside mules or farm implements and casually with their guns, and their features looked familiar, but their backdrops looked really unfamiliar. So, am I a bird or a fish? Does a bird always recognize when a new bird that it encounters is another bird? Does a fish always recognize a fellow fish? In the early 2000s, I was forced to admit that my Anglo-American alliance was over. I fully blame Richard Curtis films for having gotten me into it in the first place. I was Andy McDowell in my all-American jeans, wearing the wrong clothes and saying the wrong things. And he was Hugh Grant, brushing out his scarlet hunting coat and his top hat and leaping the frosted hedgerows of an English morning in the gunless but not bloodless pursuit of his prey. And I thought, well, I don't know whether I'm the bird or fish in this interspecies dalliance, but it doesn't really matter. We shared a common language, but we never really found a common ground. We never really found a place where we could live. I had learned my lesson completely. I needed to find somebody who was more like me, no more exotic men from foreign climes, no more wildly differing backgrounds. So I returned with my tail between my legs to my native United States. I met him in a dive bar in Chicago in the middle of a very steely cold winter, and it was a rare connection, not sudden, not like a flash of recognition, but like the calm, slow spreading of a smile. He came from country too, but Florida, Okeechobee, Florida. He was lanky, and so lanky that I think water could kind of collect in his suprasternal notch if it rained. He was a gentle, smart kind of guy who made me laugh, but I soon discovered that he kept 2 handguns in a locked briefcase under his bed, amongst other things that were close to his heart, and I was horrified. I said, God, explain to me why you have these. He was looking at me, and he was bemused, but I was scared. I was scared not just about the guns, but about what they represented for the fledgling us. But I thought we were the same. He told me that once upon a time he limped as well. He'd been driving full speed in Central Florida with his cousin, shooting doves out the window as they went. Who does that? And they'd plunged their pickup truck into a canal, to right, of course. Introduced me to his father, who showed me family photo albums of all these people in camouflage pointing bloody deer's head at the camera. And I met his mother, who would shove a handgun in her handbag before she went to the grocery store. And I met his grandfather, who had a bullet lodged in the floor of his front room, where some years ago he'd shot a live armadillo in the head in the sitting room, splattering its guts all over the furniture and the walls. This was a favorite family story. I related to none of it, not the gun, not the bullet, not the armadillo. And in the kitchen, they were preparing for lunch when we arrived. There was a pan, and in the pan, they were frying up his grandfather's favorite lunch, squirrel. I can understand why my parents never told me about my grandfather's squirrel lunches that he shot on his way to his cousin's house in Utility, Kentucky, because it might have changed how I felt about him, and I wasn't sure how I felt about this, because a bird and a fish can love each other, and we totally did. But where the hell would we live? Sometime before the end, we drove up to the mountains in Tennessee, and we were very much in love. And we walked through the forest, and we could smell the earth and the trees, and we could hear the rushing streams, and he'd talk me into it. We put 2 rusty old paint cans on a log in the distance, and for the first and last time in my life, I lifted a gun, and I aimed, and I fired, and the paint can leapt into the air, and these arcs of white paint spewed everywhere. And I looked at him, and I was horrified. And he was beaming like the sun. And I knew in that instant two things. One, that I loved him more than anything, and two, that I thought that we'd never find some place where we could live. When I ripped out his heart, I killed something in my own, but I didn't even have the words to justify why I did it. I just said, I just think we're too different. And he called it a tragedy. And I said, oh, what the hell are you calling a tragedy? This isn't Romeo and Juliet. Nobody's died. Get over yourself. Later, I looked up why the Montagues and Capulets hated each other so much, and it turns out that Shakespeare never said. I saw this man recently in Florida in a cottage that my parents have down there, and we lapsed again into our easy silences and our easier conversation, free of any anxiety or self-consciousness or our uncanny synchronicities. And together we watched as the sun went down over the river and the sky turned pink and then violet and salmon. And then we watched as the fish jumped joyfully in the water and the birds flew over the water, skimming close past the fish towards home. Thank you.